In 1971, Iacocca gave his engineers a simple, brutal command. Build a car that weighs under 2,000 pounds and costs under $2,000. It was called the Ford Pinto. It was supposed to be the little carefree car that saved Ford from the Volkswagen Beetle. But inside the Ford boardroom, a secret document was circulating. A document that didn't talk about sales or styling. It talked about death. Ford's accountants had discovered a fatal design flaw. In a rear-end collision, the Pinto's gas tank would rupture, turning the car into a rolling incinerator. They knew it, they tested it, and they found a fix. It cost exactly $11 per car. But instead of fixing the problem, Ford did something that would change the legal world forever. They calculated the price of a human life, and they decided it was cheaper to let people burn. To understand the Ford Pinto, you have to understand the pressure Ford was under in the late 1960s. The Japanese were coming. Volkswagen was winning. Iacocca, the legendary father of the Mustang, wanted a hit. He demanded a 2000 car, under 2,000 pounds, under $2,000. To hit those numbers, engineers had to cut corners, massive corners. In a traditional car, the fuel tank is protected by a heavy subframe or placed above the rear axle. In the Pinto, the fuel tank was placed just 6 inches behind the rear bumper. Even worse, it was positioned right behind the rear differential housing, a heavy piece of metal covered in sharp, protruding bolts. Ford's own internal crash tests conducted before the car ever hit the showroom floor, were a disaster. At a mere 20 miles per hour, the rear end of the Pinto would buckle like an accordion. The gas tank would be driven forward into those sharp differential bolts. Punctures would occur, fuel would spray, and in the presence of a single spark, the passenger compartment would become a blast furnace. Ford knew this. In 11 out of 11 secret tests, the fuel tank failed, unless they added a small plastic baffle, an $11 reinforcement. But the assembly lines were already tooled. The 2000 rule was absolute. To fix the cars meant delaying the launch and spending money. So the accountants pulled out their pens, and they started the most infamous math problem in history. This is where the story moves from a bad design to a corporate crime. The document in question is officially known as Fatalities Associated with Crash-Induced Fuel Leakage and Fires. To the world, it is simply known as the Pinto Memo. Ford's analysts sat down and calculated the benefit of fixing the car versus the cost of paying for the deaths. Here is the math they used, and it is chilling. They estimated that 180 people would burn to death in Pintos. They estimated another 180 would suffer serious burn injuries. They estimated 2,100 vehicles would be destroyed by fire. Then they assigned a dollar value to those lives. At the time, the National Highway Safety Administration had a statistical value for a human life. Ford used that number, $200,000. For a serious burn injury, $67,000. For the car, $700. When you multiply the deaths, the injuries, and the property damage, the cost to Ford for settling lawsuits was roughly $49.5 million. Now, look at the other side of the ledger. To fix 12.5 million cars at $11 each would cost Ford $137 million. The math was simple. It was $87 million cheaper to let 180 people die than it was to add an $11 piece of plastic. This wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Before we get into the court case that broke Ford's bank, stories like this take weeks of research into internal documents and engineering reports. If you value this kind of deep-dive automotive forensics, hit that subscribe button right now. We're on a mission to hit our goal of 8 more long-form documentaries to keep this channel alive. Join the machine. Now, back to the fallout. In May of 1972, the math became real. Lily Gray was driving her 1972 Ford Pinto on a California highway with 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw in the passenger seat. The car stalled. A car behind them, traveling at about 30 miles per hour, tapped the rear bumper. It was a low-speed collision. In any other car, it would have been a fender bender. In the Pinto, the tank ruptured, the interior was flooded with vapor,
At least 2 people
and in
were killed
seconds,
and around
the
100
car
were injured in
exploded.
the accident.
Lily Gray
The
died
accident
in
scene
agony.
turned into a chaotic
Richard Grimshaw
spectacle.
survived, but he
Vehicles
would
were
spend the
completely
rest of his
destroyed.
life undergoing over 60 surgeries to repair the burns that covered his body. When the case went to court, Ford's defense was that the car met all federal safety standards of the time. And technically, they were right. But then, the memo surfaced. When the jury in the Grimshaw versus Ford Motor Company case saw the Pinto memo, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. It wasn't just about a bad design car anymore. It was about callous disregard. The jury was so horrified by the $11 calculation that they didn't just award Richard Grimshaw compensatory damages. They wanted to punish Ford. They awarded him $125 million in punitive damages. At the time, it was the largest personal injury award in history. The judge later reduced the amount, but the damage to Ford's reputation was total. The Pinto, once the little carefree car, became a national joke. Comedians called it the barbecue that seats four. But the impact of the Pinto memo went far beyond Ford. It gave birth to the modern era of strict liability. Before this case, you had to prove a company was negligent. After the Pinto, if you put a defective product into the stream of commerce, you are responsible, period. It also forced the creation of more aggressive NTHSA standards. The 5-mile-per-hour bumper laws, the fuel system integrity tests, all of these exist because 180 people were seen as too expensive to save. Ford eventually recalled 1.5 million Pintos in 1978. They added the $11 plastic baffle. They lengthened the filler neck. They made the car safe, but they did it 7 years too late. The Ford Pinto remains the ultimate cautionary tale of corporate greed. It reminds us that when you reduce a human soul to a line item on a spreadsheet, the cost is always higher than you think. Would you drive a Pinto today? Or is the ghost of that $11 memo still too loud? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see our next deep dive into the illegal trucks of the chicken tax, make sure you're subscribed.